Next, we're speaking with Doctor of Economics, public figure, and Rector of the International Institute of Business, Oleksandr Savchenko. Oleksandr, hello. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hello. Glad to see you.
I'd like to start by noting that Russia is experiencing a series of accidents and disasters that at first glance seem unrelated to each other. Well, you might wonder, what do they have in common? Let's just take the last 24 hours as an example. What do a gas explosion that destroyed the entrance of a 10-story apartment building in Saratov and the crash of an N-24 with 43 passengers on board in the Amur region on Thursday have in common? But are we right in thinking that all of this is, after all, the cumulative effect of sanctions? We talked about this a year ago and 2 years ago as well, that sanctions don't work immediately, and you have to wait for that tipping point when Russia will no longer be able to cope with them, with its mantras about import substitution and so on and so forth.
You know, I would add another case to this list. There is a water shortage in Donetsk and other major cities that are under occupation. Water is supplied only once every 3 days. And this is also a problem of the worn-out state of the housing and utilities infrastructure. There are no repairs, no modernization, and everything is breaking down. And there are probably many more such points. It's just that information about the critical state of infrastructure in this country is starting to leak out. Indeed, the persistent shortage of essential spare parts and the slow adoption of crucial new technologies are collectively leading to the undeniable fact that the significant wear and tear on many vital infrastructure projects, and not just those, for example, critical airplanes or powerful locomotive is rapidly reaching its absolute operational limit. Well, they took the plane and extended its service life by 10 years, but without the quality technical maintenance provided by Ukrainian specialists. I want to remind you that this plane was manufactured in Kyiv 50 years ago and hasn't been serviced for 10 years now. And it is quite obvious that such unfortunate cases will not just be isolated incidents, but will inevitably become the unfortunate norm, affecting many. But I would like to add that it's not just this that leads to such a deplorable state and technical, not catastrophes yet, but problem. There's also a shortage of money. The shortage of money is growing. Indeed, the profitability of all Russian enterprises is sharply declining. No profit means no money for repairs and maintenance, especially in areas like aviation, automotive manufacturing, and housing and utilities. Yes, prices have increased by 13 to 14%, but that doesn't make it possible to cover all expenses, especially investment-related ones. This type of expense is considered investment. It's capital repairs and modernization. There's no money for that. They're not even included in the cost price. That's the situation. The shortage of funds is the second problem. And the third problem is the shortage of personnel. Yeah, there really is, especially if we talk about a structural shortage of personnel. Well, they've taken drivers for the war, they've taken pilots for the war, because our armed forces are effectively shooting down and destroying aviation along with the pilots. And so this shortage of qualified personnel leads to such consequences. So, well, I would say there are three interconnected reasons here, but there is a root cause, right? All of this, every single aspect, is a direct consequence of Putin's calculated policy. First and foremost, it is undeniably Russia's aggressive and unprovoked war against Ukraine. And I have long since come to the firm conclusion that this country, Russia itself, will inevitably face very real and substantial problems by the end of September, or at the very latest, the beginning of October. That is precisely when the critical shortage of financial funds will become so incredibly significant and overwhelmingly apparent that Putin will be absolutely forced to drastically cut spending on this ongoing war effort. He didn't misspeak at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum 2 months ago when he said that next year spending on the Russian army is planned to be reduced. Yes, there simply isn't any money left That's it. So the root cause is Putin's policy. And there are also many other factors, including indeed a shortage of Western equipment, technology, and maintenance. I also consider Ukraine to be a Western country, so this leads to these constant incidents, and there will be more of them.
Well, it seems they've decided to make up for the money shortage by turning on the printing press. Recently, information appeared in several media outlets that the central bank gave a secret order to print, if I'm not mistaken, about 6 trillion rubles. And what could happen if these unsecured pieces of paper are thrown into the furnace of the economy?
Indeed, they've used this tactic before. Then, through manipulations by the Ministry of Finance and the central bank, they call this economic growth. In other words, they print money and supposedly count it as GDP growth. But I've long since come to the conclusion that there hasn't been any growth in this country since 2022. There was manipulation of the numbers, especially with something called the GDP deflator. What is the GDP deflator? It's the increase in prices not only for consumer goods, because the rise in consumer goods prices is called inflation, but for all goods, industrial and investment goods as well. In short, for everything. So by manipulating this coefficient, they turned negative growth rates into positive ones. It's just that this year it's absolutely no longer possible to effectively hide it with mere manipulations, because then in the very next year they would inevitably have to show a significant drop of, say, at least 10%. And that's why this year, I'm sure they'll show zero or maybe minus 0.1, 0.2. Well, that's a recession. That's it. And what you're talking about, when they print money and present it as GDP growth, which is what happened, this results in inflation. So they printed money. What does it mean when they print money and give it to someone? And it's obvious who they're giving it to. They give this money primarily for the war and to enterprises in the military industrial complex. When they printed and handed out 6 trillion, in reality, it means that 6 trillion was taken from the pockets of other economic actors, people, small and very small businesses through rising prices. It's very hard to fool the economy. So in a way, it's like being a caliph for an hour. They gave out this money, a month or two passed, the money spread throughout the system, prices went up, and that money is already gone. The second, of course, negative factor is the depreciation of the ruble, which everyone has finally been waiting for, when the ruble would start to lose value. Well, just a little, by 1%.
By the way, Alexander, excuse me, right now analysts are saying that the ruble has weakened because of the fruitless negotiations in Istanbul. In your opinion, is this already a trend and will it continue to decline? Or was this just a situational occurrence?
You see, the ruble and its exchange rate in Russia are no longer a market category. That is, the rate is set by the Ministry of Finance and the central bank. They ask Putin what rate to set. Why? Because not everyone can take advantage of that rate. So you go to the bank and want to withdraw your foreign currency deposit, right? And they tell you, we don't have any dollars, but we'll give you rubles at the rate of 79. The real market rate should be, well, 110. Everyone is saying now that this is the real rate, but people are given 79, you see? That's why there are such manipulations with the exchange rate. Obviously, this leads to budget losses because foreign currency revenues are multiplied not by 110, but by 79, and less money goes into the budget. But over there, they just print money, sort of trying to get out of the situation. But I repeat, this is just a fleeting solution. Putin, with all his might, yes, using the last of his temporary resources, is trying to bluff. He says that everything is fine with the Russian economy. But in reality, that's not the case. I repeat, Putin's time reserve is very limited. Well, I give it about 2 months. In October, I guarantee that they will start howling, that they will be forced to cut not only spending on investment projects, which has already happened. Gref talked about this, and not just him, yes. That's VTB Bank and Sberbank. These are the two banks that finance any investment projects. And by the way, it was these projects that drove growth, right? It's fictitious because the projects were inefficient. A lot of money was embezzled. They didn't create any added value, but formally they included this in economic growth, just like, for example, the production of rockets and tanks, which don't create any added value but are formally included in the GDP. So that's why you had that story where someone claimed that 3 million Shohin, I think, right? Well, he used to be a pretty decent small business economist, I'll put it that way. Even though he was put in charge of overseeing the oligarchs, he's certainly not a financier and doesn't really understand macroeconomics. So his statement that we need 3 million in deficit, 3 million new workers,
Migrants.
not 3 million people who need to be brought in from Asia, and now they even want to bring them in from India, right? Actually, that's not the case, yes. Why? There is a real shortage, yes, but it's structural. Look, the workers at VAS and GAS, so they're not being laid off, but they're not working at full capacity.
4 days.
Yes, 4 days.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
But in reality, even less. There are huge downtimes there. They are working at 50% of these enterprises' capacity. Where was this labor force especially needed? On investment projects funded by the state budget, on road construction, road repairs, bridges. A lot of unskilled labor was needed there. But now there's no money, and those projects won't happen. Starting from September, there won't be such projects anymore. They can bring them in, let them bring them in, but then they'll just leave. Afterwards, they'll only be sent to the army for disposal. That's precisely why there aren't the necessary financial resources or sufficient monetary funds readily available there to effectively employ these additional 3 billion, more accurately, 3 million workers. This is exactly what prominent individuals like Shohin, who regrettably do not truly or deeply understand the fundamental principles of macroeconomics, consistently fail to adequately grasp or comprehend, leading to significant misunderstandings. I do want to say, though, that at the central bank and the Ministry of Finance, they have a better understanding and assess the shortages more accurately. I think, yes, there may be a shortage of 500,000 or even 1 million, but it's very difficult to address, I repeat, because right now we're seeing the collapse of investment projects that required a lot of labor. The second area where there's a shortage is housing and utilities. But there, the shortages of money, and it's unlikely that funding will be provided. That's why we keep seeing these floods, dam and bridge breaches, floods. Why is that? Is it because there aren't people to maintain and clean all these systems? It's because there's no money, yes, nothing to pay with. So that's precisely why the fundamental structural imbalances, financial, human, and technical, will only continue to keep growing significantly. Let's be realistic about it. In this state, the country can go on existing for a very long time. The main conclusion we can draw, the only positive one for use, is that objectively the costs of war for them will decrease. If our partners continue to support us so that our defense spending does not decrease but actually increases, then the outcome of the war will be predetermined. Well, not just because I'm a financier and economist, but many military leaders have always said that in a long war, it's the rear that wins. Whoever has more resources to support their army is the one who wins. So, well,
I see. Well, regarding migrants, it's very strange, yes, to see a country that, according to various estimates, needs about 3 million workers and is relying on migrants, including from Central Asia, but at the same time is conducting police and militia safaris against them across all regions of Ukraine and shooting itself in the foot. But let them keep going in the same vein. I think very few people would want to go there now to save the Russian economy, Alexander, but you and I both understand that the chance, well, you say that Putin only has a few months left before the economic stretch, but it's unlikely that he'll stop and start allocating less money to military purposes. So then, if he continues at the same pace, what awaits the economy? Well, he can take away from some social sectors. Well, pensioners can endure for a couple of months, learn to eat wild herbs, and so on and so forth. You see, he might just ignore the population.
Look, they're already enduring it. In reality, all those stories about real incomes growing by 2 or 3% were just fairy tales. In fact, they were actually falling by 2 or 3%. Of course, the decline was small. At this rate of decline, this country could keep going for another 10 to 15 years. And in general, market economies don't decline. Unfortunately, both Putin and the government elite haven't completely destroyed the market economy yet, unfortunately. That's it. But in a market economy, a person even Putin, yes, even though he's not really a person, right? They're fighting against demonic forces now, aren't they? The devil is banned, but I don't understand why Putin is allowed then, because probably there isn't a person in the world who threatens and sends several 100,000 people to the next world every year. And most of them are his own compatriots. But this is the true devil. Even though, as you know, they've banned the devil and are already arresting even Z-bloggers and official press correspondents on that basis, well, it's absurd. So whatever he wants, he can't increase these expenses. Why? Because then it would be necessary to, well, absolutely reduce wages. Absolutely. That is, not to keep up with, say, inflation at 15%, as it is now indeed. Right now it's about 15%. That's why the central bank lowered the Q rate to 18. Right now it reflects the realities of the economy, right? But they raised pensions for retirees by 5%, right? In reality, that's minus 10. So starting from around October, he won't even have money for this nominal increase. He simply won't. And not just for retirees, there are so many ochlocrats there, and they still need to steal too. And that's why Putin has started reducing the number of corrupt officials and thieves, because there simply have to be fewer of them since the pie is shrinking and there's nothing left to steal. But how will the elite live without stealing? They can't live like that. In that case, they'll start protesting. They might even plot a conspiracy. That is, if there's no fresh blood, they've already taken everything from the West, right? Everything that could be has been nationalized and handed over to friends. Now they've started taking the juiciest pieces from their own domestic businessmen. But even that is running out. It's coming to an end. And that's why I don't believe that Putin has any reserves left to increase war spending. This is the limit. Around September, we'll reach the limit. By October, spending should already be reduced. Well, you can't finance the deficit, the one that's shaping up for them, right? They wanted 3, now it's about 4. But in reality, everyone says 7, 8, most likely even 10 trillion, right? That's nearly $100 billion, which they don't have. Even if they sell off all the reserves from their wealth fund, it still won't be enough. Right? They'll print more, they'll print half of it. That's exactly what they're planning to. But what happens next? What happens after that? After that, there are no reserves left, and printing more money becomes impossible. It's only in the early stages of accelerated money printing that inflation has a lag of 2 or 3 months. It doesn't spike immediately, and the exchange rate doesn't drop right away, but after 2 or 3 months. But when it becomes a steady trend, inflation can even outpace the rate of money printing, and devaluation can occur as well.
Well, we've already seen all of this before, both before and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, with particular attention. Yes, with special interest and attention. You're right, we need to closely watch their infighting, yes, as they try to take money from each other. Because even from our school biology classes, we remember that the most brutal form of competition is interspecific competition. And as a rule, it ends very badly for those involved, which is exactly what we wish for them. Oleksandr Savchenko, Doctor of Economics, public figure, and Rector of the International Institute of Business, was our guest today. Oleksandr, thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank you and goodbye.